Episode 107, Coffee with John and Jim Comer.
Today is gonna be a little something more. I've got a plan in mind, a special thing in store. The light bulb inside my head says, get out and play, 'cause you never feel this way. It's my lucky day.
Well, welcome, friends, to Coffee with John. If you are a family or professional caregiver, a healthcare technology innovator, an academic researcher, or social worker, I'm glad you joined us to talk about caregiver success. You know, for many family caregivers, the question each day is, how do I survive caregiving? Well, today we're going to share not only how to survive caregiving, but how to survive caregiving with sanity and a sense of humor. Our guest is going to share real-life stories, practical tips, and how healing humor will help you communicate better with your loved one. But first, a good word for caregivers.
God cares for caregivers. Remember, He's one too. I remember a song from my younger years that said, "No one understands like Jesus. He's a friend beyond compare. Meet Him at the throne of mercy. He's waiting for you there." And what I learned in my younger years, that was true even now in my older years. I find it to be so. That He's the friend who understands like nobody else. Maybe you don't feel that anybody can understand what you're going through. And you may be right. There are people who are not in your situation, so they really can't quite understand. But I will tell you, there is somebody who feels it with you. He feels it all. And He, as a caregiver, understands. He knows. He knows. In fact, He tells us greater love has no one than this, than He laid down His life for His friends. Well, He did that in His caring. And maybe you feel like you're laying down your life for this one that you care for so much, and you're giving so much of yourself. Well, understand that you can gain strength and energy, help and grace, and He is the one who can give it to you. So don't forget that. You see, you're His friend. And as a friend, He wants to help you. Let Him help you, dear friend, right now, today. God cares for caregivers. Remember, He's one too.
Welcome back to Coffee with John. Today we're having coffee with Jim Comer. After his father suffered a massive stroke and his mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, Jim found himself overnight in the reverse role of his parents' parent. In 10 years of caregiving, he's learned to deal with hospitals, insurance companies, rehab centers, his father's deafness, and his mother's dementia. Through it all, Jim has kept his sanity and sense of humor, and in the process, he forged a deeper and more intimate relationship with his parents. Jim, welcome to the show.
Always make me sound so much better than I really am. But I was listening to it, and all of a sudden, I was kind of thrown back to February the 20th, 1996, when I was sound asleep in my apartment out in Los Angeles, where I was working as a speechwriter for a CEO, and I get this call from my parents' next-door neighbor in Dallas. I'm sound asleep. I reach for the phone, and I hear the voice of the neighbor who has never called me in 34 years.
Wow.
And in that one, when I heard her name, Lisa Huff, I went totally awake. In 2 seconds, I was awake, and I knew the next sentence was going to be terrible. And she's telling me that my father is wandering around in the front yard in a daze, and she thinks he's having a stroke. And, of course, she was right.
Wow.
And within 10 hours, I was on a plane to Dallas, and my world had changed forever. And I was not ready. Absolutely not ready.
You know, I think that's really something we want to talk about is just, you know, people aren't ready. And I think even professional caregivers, people that are in this industry aren't ready. What did you learn?
I've spoken to audiences all over the country and a lot of professional caregivers. And what I have found is they're just exactly like regular folks who are not wanting to deal with this enormous transition in their family life. It is difficult. It's emotionally hard for both the parent and the adult caregiver, but it has to be addressed. The most important thing, I want people listening to this today, I want them to get the fact that if you haven't had a no-holds-barred, 100% open conversation with your parents, or if you're a parent, with your children, then that is the single most important thing you can do to get ready for caregiving. You need to sit down and talk together honestly and openly about what your parents want, what they don't want, what they can afford, any problems that they see. Get everything on the table, because until you really talk and find out the facts of the situation, you're in the dark. And my father wouldn't talk about it. Before his stroke, I had tried for 5 years to get him to move down to where the relatives were in Central Texas. He was in Dallas, where we had no relatives. My mother already had dementia, and she really couldn't be part of the conversation. And Dad would not talk about it. He would walk up, when I would bring up the subject, he would get up from the table and leave the room.
Yeah.
And I let him get by with that year after year. Every Christmas, I came home and tried to talk about it. And every Christmas, he shut me down. And I didn't push hard enough. I was trying to be the good guy, not make waves, and I should have pushed harder. I should have told him, Dad, we have to talk about this. I need to be able to be there for you if you need me, but I can't if I don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
But I didn't do that. And so I paid a big price for it when I got that call from the neighbor. And all of a sudden I showed up in Dallas, and he couldn't walk, he couldn't talk, he couldn't go to the restroom on his own. He was in intensive care, and I had to make all the decisions. And I started from absolute zero scratch.
So going back and knowing what you know now, when you open up that conversation and you start having that in-depth conversation, what are some of those top questions that you just have to ask and you've got to get answered?
Yeah, and the most important thing that you need to do when you have that conversation is to really listen. Listen carefully at what your parents are saying. Don't push your own agenda. Find out what they want and what they don't want. For many people, they do not want to leave their home.
Yeah.
Right. That is number one on their list. I don't want to go into and then they'll put some horrible word for long-term care because they think it's like the old ones that they knew from their youth, but it's not. But anyway, you need to know if that is their number one thing, you've got to try to find a way to work around that if it's possible, see? But I would say that finding out what your parents want and what they don't want is really key. Because you need to try to work within what they want, because it's not you imposing something on them, but it's you working within what they think is best for them at the moment. Now, that's going to change over time.
Right.
But you have to find out what they want, because you don't want to be pushing them to do something they don't want until you have to. The second thing would be what can they afford? Because like with my folks, they were living comfortably in retirement, and they were actually still saving money. And all of a sudden, as time went on, within a few years, they went from independent living to skilled nursing. And when that happened, my goodness, they went from independent living was maybe, I think, $4,000 a month for the two of them, and skilled nursing was $8,000 or $9,000 for the two of them at the time, and that was 15. That was 2000. So I mean, you imagine today even higher. So suddenly the finances changed, and we were able to pay for it for a while, but eventually they went through all their money.
Yeah, and that's a conversation that every parent loves to have with their children is, let me open up the books for you and tell you exactly what mom and dad have.
Oh, God. And my father, as time went, I'll never forget this. As time went on, he would ask from, and my dad, I need to tell the audience here, my dad had a complete recovery. Amazingly, he was 86 years old, but he had a complete recovery from his stroke, which I didn't know was going to happen. Because
wow.
when I arrived at the intensive care that day, it didn't look like he might even make it for the week.
Wow.
And But he did. He raised a lot of hell over that first 3 or 4 months. He got thrown out of the first rehab place he was in because he was yelling at the nurses, and I'm sure using language that maybe from his Air Force days,
Right.
it might not have been the best. So they threw him out. They called me and said they were expelling my father from rehab.
Talk about role reversal.
I'm not kidding. It was a parent-teacher call. I'd never had a parent-teacher call because I don't have kids, and this was my first one, and only I was the parent, and my father was the kid. And I had to fly back yet again. I mean, I kept flying every 2 weeks from L.A. to Austin, and I had to give him a new place.
Wow.
And my mother had been staying with my poor cousins, and I knew she was driving them crazy because they each had kids and they only had jobs. And so I needed to get both parents in a new facility. I needed to get her in assisted living and him in skilled nursing. And I had 1 day to do it. I got there at about 10 o'clock on a Friday, or noon maybe, and I went to the place in town in Austin that had the continuum of care. I think it was the only place in town that had that in 97. And wow, I can still remember going there and telling them I needed to get my mother in and my dad in by Monday. And they looked at me like I had lost my mind.
Yeah, this was on a Friday?
Yeah, this is Friday about 2 o'clock. And I'm saying I got to get them both in on Monday. Really, I really do. She needs assisted living. He needs skilled nursing. What do you have? Well, of course, that's just impossible. But they were kind to this poor person walking in the door, and they took me into the admissions office. I can still remember it. This was before they had computers. She got these big books out, and she's going through these 2 books, one for each. And all of a sudden, she starts bouncing around with this big smile on her face, and she says, "We've got openings on Monday." It was like she was saying, "You won the lottery."
and
of course,
thank
I had
you.
won the lottery, but I was so stupid and new, I didn't even know how lucky we were. But I got them both in on Monday. I really did. And then I flew back to L.A. thinking, okay, well, this time I've dodged the bullet. It's going to be okay now. But, of course, things keep happening. And eventually, for about 4 months, 5 months into this, I realized that I couldn't do what needed to be done from 1,000 miles.
Right.
I really had to either move them to California where they didn't know anybody and where I was the only person that would have been in their life. And it would have been much, much more expensive.
Well,
or I had to quit my job and move back to Texas. And that starting all over at 50, not so easy.
Yeah, and that kind of goes into something. So you made a decision. You were in California. They were in Austin. Your dad was recovering from a stroke, but your mom started having dementia and the onset of Alzheimer's.
She'd had dementia for about 5 years.
So you decided
by the time the stroke happened, she was already unable to live by herself.
Yeah.
Dad had taken over everything, but she didn't know that. So I got to tell you this story. You'll like this. It's the first week. And I've picked St. David's rehab here in Austin, and I picked St. David's because I went to four rehab units in one day because I had to make a decision, and they all looked the same. I had no idea what I was looking for. But at St. David's, a nurse smiled at me.
Wow.
And that made all the difference. So healthcare professionals are listening. That smile was about a $50,000 smile for St. David's because it made me feel that they were going to be warm and caring to my mother. So I made the decision based on that smile. That's really true. So that they had told me they were going to bring Dad down on Monday in an ambulance and Medicare would pay for it, but I had to get Mother down to Austin to my cousins who had volunteered to keep her.
Right.
And she said she wasn't going. She was staying in Dallas, not moving out of her house. Of course, she couldn't stay in Dallas, but she didn't know that. So I used a brilliant concept I want everybody to get. You're going to use this. It's called therapeutic lying.
My dad's a pastor, and my dad calls it evangelistically speaking.
Okay, that's good. I like that. I go for that. So on the day they were moving Dad, I had packed for my mother the night before. I get all of her stuff in the car, and I go to her at 8:30 in the morning. She's reading the Dallas Morning News, drinking her cup of coffee, and I look her and I tell a whopper. I say, "Mom, would you like to go get some ice cream?" And you have to know that my mother never turns down ice cream, ever. This was my ace in the hole. I thought, if this doesn't work, I don't know what I'm going to do. And she smiled, got right up, put the coffee down, and happily walked with me and got into the car. And we drove away from her home of 34 years, and she never saw it again.
Wow.
I know. But I want you to know, before you all think out in the audience here, before you think Jim is a bad guy, I want you to know I stopped. We got her the biggest, gooeyest chocolate sundae you can ever imagine. She did get the ice cream, and then we just kept driving. And I kept waiting for her to say something about it. And with her early dementia, she never mentioned anything. I kept, sometimes, by the time we got to Waco, I was sure she was going to say nothing. She was commenting on the colors of passing cars.
Wow.
She talked about those for about an hour. And I was just so grateful, and I got her to my cousins in Georgetown, and they had, I always say that they had guaranteed their sainthood by agreeing to keep my mother. And I gave them my mother, and Dad was in the hospital, and I flew back to L.A. I'd been gone 11 days on that very first trip.
Yeah.
And I was, and again, I was in a total fog.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how I ever came up with the ice cream bit, just out of desperation. Here's another thing that's so important to know. You are not going to have all the answers, and that's true in the first week, and it's true in the last week of caregiving. You're never going to have all the answers. It's never going to be super clear what to do. You're going to, as time goes on, you're going to get better and better at it, but you're going to always have to improvise some. You're going to have to trust your gut. So my improvisation was the ice cream bit. And I didn't know what else to do, and I was betting on that, and it worked. And there's other times I tried stuff that didn't work. You know, I'm no brilliant guy here. I'm just somebody who showed up. The most important thing I can tell anybody who's going to be a caregiver is don't worry about being perfect. Don't worry about you've got to do it right. Well, you don't have to do it right. You just have to show up and do the best you can.
Yes.
That's what I did.
Yes.
I got to tell you, I mean, you gave me that lovely intro, and I appreciate it. But the truth is, I had lived in New York and L.A. for 30 years, and I tried to make it as an actor in New York, and then I became a speech coach and a speechwriter and eventually a speaker. But I was super self-involved, and I was not the world's most unselfish person. So for me to be able to show up was a big deal.
Yeah.
Of course, it helped that I was the only child. I'd lost my brother in a car wreck 30 years earlier, and so I was it. And while I was very self-involved, I knew I had to show up.
Yeah.
So I did. But as I've talked around the country and I've spoken to groups all over the place, I see so many families where many of the children don't show up.
Yeah. Well, I want to go back to something that you said a minute ago, because I think this goes into showing up. So you were in kind of Los Angeles, and you had to move to Austin because you couldn't move them to Los Angeles because they didn't know anyone.
I asked myself the question, L.A. or move them to L.A. or me to Austin. The clear right thing to do was for me to go there, where they had support and family and it was cheaper and all those things.
So you chose to go into their world. Can you kind of walk us through how important and how significant that choice was, and maybe some things even beyond the physical move that you made from Los Angeles to Austin?
Yeah, I thought the physical move was a real big deal, and I guess it was because I was leaving a secure job and friends and a church that I loved, and going back to Texas where I hadn't lived in 30 years. And I didn't have a job, and I didn't have a network, just some family. But I did it, but the real work came once I got to Texas. And for the first time, I was around my mother and with her early Alzheimer's, and I still didn't have the slightest idea of the real impact of Alzheimer's.
Yes.
I didn't. I thought I knew, but I didn't have the slightest idea. For example, she had like 60 dresses in her closet. This is when they'd finally moved into independent living. Dad had recovered. They'd gotten into independent living, and 60 dresses in her closet, and she would only wear 5 of them. She thought the others were stolen. Stolen.
Wow, they were in her closet, but she thought they were stolen.
And including dresses I had given her.
And there was no amount of you telling her would convince her that they weren't stolen.
Absolutely. She was beyond the land of logic.
Yes.
But I was not, even when we were having this conversation, I was going, Mom, I gave you that dress. No, you didn't. It's stolen. It is a stolen dress. Do you want me to go to the Who Scout? She actually said that word, Who Scout. I'm not kidding. I say that. If I say it out of the South, they don't even know what I'm talking about. I have to define who's Scout. Anyway, yeah, she really thought she would be put in jail if she wore any of these dresses. She only wore 5. So I should have gotten a hint by there. And then the time came when she asked me if she could go to see her sister in Smithville, which is about 60 miles away.
Sure.
And I went, wow, really? And then I thought, wow, it's a perfectly logical question, except for one tiny flaw. Sister has been dead for 8 years.
Wow.
And because I was a rookie caregiver, I had only been there about a month when she asked this. I just moved to Texas, and I made the gigantic mistake of telling her the truth.
Mm-hmm.
I said, Mama, we can't go see Estelle. She's in heaven. And my mother all of a sudden got that news as if it was the first time she'd ever heard it.
Oh.
And she started crying, wailing, sobbing, tears coming down her face. She cried for 10 or 15 minutes, and I'm sitting there going, what did I do?
Right.
What did I do? I just told the truth. Well, I should have known better by then. But I didn't.
Yeah.
I didn't know better.
You tried to bring her to your world.
Again, I was trying to bring her to what really happened. What was, the facts. Well, she was beyond the facts.
Yeah.
And she didn't need to know that fact. And so I was freaked out. I really was totally freaked out. But I asked somebody, get me in to see an Alzheimer's person. I need some help here. And I think that was the next day. I was able to get in to this Alzheimer's expert. And I walked in. I can still remember the look on her face. And I said, I don't think I can do this. And she said, honey, I hear you don't have much choice.
She gave you a little dose of reality.
She gave me, and I said, well, what do I do? And then she gave me the single best piece of advice I ever got in 14 years of caregiving. She said, quit trying to drag your mother into your world. She can't go there.
Yeah.
She can't go there. Instead, you must go into her world. Go into her world. Well, and when she said that, it was as if there was a click, and I got it. I actually got it in that moment. I'm not always that quick a study, but I got that one, thank goodness. And I realized that's it. Just go where she is. And I started that day, and I did it for the next 14 years. And it made all the difference in the world. Because no longer was I trying to get my mother to be right. I was trying to help her deal with what she could and had to deal with.
Yes.
On her terms, not on my terms.
Yes.
And this made such a gigantic difference because, for example, in those early years, when she was still very, very funny and she was very verbal and had a great sense of humor in the moment. And I would go see her, in the independent living, and she would first thing she would ask me was about the state of my gas tank, because I was infamous for running out of gas. I don't know. I just always I ran out of gas all my life. I still struggle with it, but I'm better. So I mean, she had that in her long-term memory. She remembered that I ran out of gas. So that was the first question she'd ask me. How are you fixed for gas, Jim? Tell your mama, don't you lie to me.
Don't you lie to me.
Don't you lie to me. I said, Mother, I just filled it up. It's full tank. Now, Jim, and she once she got that subject on her mind, she might ask me 5, 6, 7, 8 times in one visit. And I would answer her without comment.
Right.
5, 6, 7, 8 times. I learned that she was really concerned about that, and I had to keep allaying her fears. And if she needed to hear it 8 times, she needed to hear it 8 times. Now, was that easy? No. Was it fun? No. But it was the right thing to do. What I want everybody to remember is that when you're faced as a caregiver with a choice between your parent being right, and we love for them to be right, for them being right or you being kind, them right versus you kind, go for kindness every single time.
Yeah.
You cannot go wrong by being kind. And I got that early. And it helped me so much during the years. As the time went on, so in those first 3 or 4 or 5 years, Mother was still fun and had a great, let me tell you, a perfect example of my mother. In those about 2 or 3 years in, every time I would walk through the lobby of independent living, this guy, 92-year-old man, would come up to me, and he would rave on about my mother's charms. I mean, he just thought she was terrific. He could not say enough good things. And this happened over and over again. I couldn't believe it. And finally, I thought, well, Mother needs to know that she has an admirer other than my father. I think she needs to know this. So I said, Mom, do you know there is a 92-year-old man who thinks you are terrific? And she said, Jim, that's the kind I attract. So she had that spontaneous sense of humor, even with the dementia, she still had that. She was very, very funny and charming. So it was great fun. But as the years went by, she began to have less and less because the dementia was taking its course.
Yes.
And, and the day came when I walked in, maybe 8 years into caregiving. I walked in one day to see her, and she had no idea who I was.
Wow.
She looked up at me with this blank expression.
And what did you do? What did you do when you walked in for the first time and she didn't know you?
Well, I had one of those moments. It was one of those improvisational moments. You have many ways to respond to that. You could be hurt. You could be angry. You could be upset. None of that's going to help at all. I mean, you could feel it, but acting on it is not going to help. I realized she just needs to know that I care about her. So I reached out my hand, said, "Hi, I'm Jim Comer, your firstborn," and I gave her a big kiss and a hug. And she looked up at me and sort of wondered who this guy was. But as I was smiling, and she was always very pleasant and kind and courteous, she smiled back, and pretty soon she warmed up to me, whoever I was.
Right.
And that worked for the next 5 years or so.
And you just continued that relationship. You just had to go into her world.
This person that showed up and liked her and paid attention to her and did nice things with her. Nothing changed except I frequently had to introduce myself. That was okay. It was okay. That was where she was.
Yeah.
Did I want her to be there? No. But was she there? Yeah, she was. Me wanting something different wasn't going to change anything.
Yeah.
Was not going to change anything at all. The only choice was being right or being kind. Back to kind. Kind was dealing with her where she was.
So if you had kind of one thing that you wanted to let people really know that are facing this, let's actually talk about two people. Let's talk about the one that faced it suddenly, and they're all of a sudden they've got that phone call from the neighbor. What would you tell them? And then also, what would you tell that person that maybe is things are well, coming up on a time of the year where we see family? What would those pieces of advice for those two different people be?
Yeah, for the one who's not ready, and this becomes as a shock, as it will for many, because much as I hate to say this, most of the people listening to this right now, even the ones that know they need to have the conversation, I hate to say this, but most of them will postpone it.
Yeah.
They'll say, okay, maybe next year. Not this Christmas, next Christmas, that kind of thing. First of all, I would say for those people, don't postpone the conversation. Have it now. There are no meaningful conversations on a respirator, and yet that is where most families begin.
Yes.
They begin after a catastrophic event. That's a gigantic mistake. I know because I lived through one.
Yeah.
The second thing I would say to that person is, no matter where you are in the process, even if you're not prepared at all, as I was not, you can do this. You absolutely can do this. Woody Allen says that the most important thing in life, 80% of life, he says, is showing up. Well, I showed up. That was the most important thing I did. I got on that plane, I flew to Dallas, and I did my best starting that day to make hundreds and hundreds of decisions and to do the best I could for my parents, given where I was. And I learned along the way. What you need to know as a potential caregiver is you do not have to do it perfectly. You just have to show up and do the best you can. And you will learn, and you will get better, and you will realize that you are not going to always know the right answer. You got to go with your gut and give the best response, the best answer, the best decision you can make, and that's okay.
Yeah. Doing your best.
That's one thing.
Yeah.
Do we have more time?
Well, doing your best, and I hear the music playing in the background, so I think that...
Oh, well, okay. And for the people who are already talking, I just think the most important thing you can do is listen. Listen and respond. So often as caregivers, we think we've got to respond instantly, have all the answers. We don't have to have all the answers. We mostly have to be there and be real and be connecting with our parents.
Well, I think that that's great advice. So do your best, be connected, go into their world. I think that's really, really good advice. Well, Jim, thank you so much.
I'm getting warmed up. I actually stood up here in my office and I was pacing. I have another hour.
Well,
I never even told you about the guy from 2 weeks ago, but another time.
We'll do another. Well, let me do this. Jim, you are a professional keynote speaker, and I know that you speak with audiences, the Alzheimer's Association, Texas Conference on Aging, Brighton Gardens. And if you'd like to learn more about Jim, you can visit his website at comercommunications.com. Jim's also written a book, Role Reverse, A Guide to Parenting Your Parents. It's available on Amazon, and you can find a direct link to his book on our show at coffeewithjohn.com/107. Well, if you found this episode valuable, please do us a favor and subscribe to Coffee with John in iTunes and leave an honest rating. If you'd like to listen to previous episodes, visit us at coffeewithjohn.com. That's coffeewithjohn, JON.com. Also, if you have comments, ideas, and topic suggestions, connect with me on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. All of the links are at coffeewithjohn.com.